My own daughter and her husband stole $78,000 from me, and when I confronted them, they laughed in my face. The family needed it more, they said. You can grow old by yourself. We have lives to live, my daughter added. That very night, I canceled their inheritance. I took back the pickup truck and started the legal process to reclaim the house where they were living. My name is Loretta Jenkins. I am 69 years old, and this is the story of how my family betrayed me and how I returned the favor. It was the morning of my 69th birthday. I had woken up with that strange, empty feeling that had been with me ever since I buried my husband 8 months ago. The lace curtains I crocheted decades ago let the golden light of dawn filter into the room. I poured myself coffee in the same china cup I had used since my marriage, the one with the tiny painted roses that had long since lost their original luster. I was hoping it would be a special day. After so many months of mourning, eating alone, and watching television without anyone to comment on the news with me, I had decided it was time to reconnect with my family. Shanice, my only daughter, had promised to come over early with Antoine, her husband, to celebrate together. They had been distant since the funeral, but I attributed it to shared grief. I checked my phone for the third time that morning. No congratulatory messages, not even a happy birthday, Mom. I told myself maybe they wanted to surprise me by showing up unannounced, just like they did when they were younger and the house was full of laughter and impromptu plans. I decided to check my email while I waited. I had a few birthday wishes from old friends, a promotion from the grocery store, and something that caught my eye. A message from my bank with the subject line, "Security alert on your account." My heart started beating faster. I had never received anything like it. My hands trembling, I clicked the link. "Dear Ms. Jenkins," it read, "we have detected unusual activity on your credit card. Multiple transactions for considerable amounts have been made over the last 30 days. For your security, we recommend reviewing your account statement immediately." The world stopped. With fingers that could barely hold the phone, I accessed my bank account. What I saw took my breath away. Transactions I didn't recognize. Department stores, expensive restaurants, even a car dealership. The total was impossible to process. $8,000. My credit limit had been completely exhausted. My life savings, the money I had kept for emergencies, for my old age, to leave something for my family when I was gone. It had all vanished. But the strangest thing was that I hadn't made any of those purchases. Someone had used my card without my knowledge. With my heart pounding, I dialed Shanice's number. The phone rang 5 times before she answered in a sleepy voice. "Mom, what's wrong? It's really early." "Shanice, honey, I need to see you urgently. Something awful has happened with my credit card. Someone has... Mom, can it wait? Antoine and I had plans today. We'll see you later." "Yes, but, honey, it's my birthday. And besides, this is very serious. Someone spent $8,000 from my account without me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Shanice spoke again, her voice had changed completely. "Mom, that's what we wanted to talk to you about. Antoine and I, well, we had a financial emergency. We borrowed the money from your card. We were going to tell you today." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You borrowed it without asking me? How did you even get my card?" "We found it in your purse when we came over after the funeral. We needed the money for the down payment on the new house, for Antoine's debts, for some investments. You weren't using that money, Mom. It was just sitting there." My legs went weak. I had to sit down in the nearest chair. "Shanice, that money was everything I had. My savings, my security." "Mom, don't be dramatic. We're family. What's yours is ours, right? Besides, when you're gone, we were going to inherit everything anyway. We just sped things up a little." The words fell on me like stones. Each one hurt more than the last. "When I'm gone? Shanice, I'm 69, not 90. That money was for my old age, for my medicines, for... Oh, Mom, always so exaggerated. Nothing is going to happen to you. Besides, we're going to take care of you when it's necessary. We'll figure it out." The line cut off. I stayed there holding the phone in silence, trying to process what had just happened. My own daughter had taken my savings without asking, as if it were her right, as if I were already dead. 2 hours later, I heard the familiar sound of the engine of the pickup truck I had given them last year. It was my red Ford F-150, the one that had belonged to my husband and that I decided to give them when Antoine lost his job. Now, I knew they had probably sold their old car with the money stolen from my account. I watched them step out of the vehicle through my living room window. Shanice wore an emerald green dress I'd never seen before, probably bought with my money. Expensive heels, a designer purse. Antoine wore a suit that looked costly, a shiny watch on his wrist. They looked like a prosperous, successful couple, all thanks to my savings. I opened the door before they could knock. Shanice gave me a quick peck on the cheek, as if it were any normal day. Antoine barely greeted me with a nod. "Happy birthday, Mom," Shanice said as she sat down on my sofa as if nothing had happened. "Did you prepare something special to celebrate?" I watched them in silence. This was my daughter, the girl I had raised alone for years, while her father worked double shifts to give us a better life. The same one who had cried in my arms when her first boyfriend hurt her. The one who had asked me for advice on everything from age 15 to 40. How had it come to this? "Shanice, we need to talk about the money," I finally said, keeping my voice steady. Antoine straightened up in his seat. For the first time, he looked at me directly. "Loretta, we understand you might be upset, but it was necessary. We had urgent debts to pay." "Urgent debts?" The blood rushed to my face. "And you couldn't ask me for help like civilized people? You had to steal from me while I slept?" "It wasn't stealing," Shanice cut in with a defensive tone I had never heard from her before. "We're family. Besides, you don't need that much money. You live alone, your house is paid for, you don't have big expenses." I stared at her, searching her eyes for any trace of the daughter I knew. "I don't need that much money? Shanice, I'm 69 years old. What if I get sick? What if I need special care? What if—" "Oh, Mom, always thinking the worst," she interrupted with a forced laugh. "You're healthy. You look great. You have years ahead of you." Antoine leaned back on the sofa, clearly uncomfortable but trying to appear casual. "Besides, Loretta, let's be honest, that money was eventually going to be ours anyway. We just sped up the process." His words hit me like a slap. "The process? Are you referring to my death?" "Don't be so dramatic," Shanice said, getting up and walking toward the kitchen as if it were her own home. "It's just money, Mom. You can get it back." "How can I get it back? I'm 69. I can't get a job. I can't start over." Shanice returned with a glass of water, sat down again, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It was as if she were looking at a stranger, someone who annoyed her. "Mom, honestly, I think you're overreacting. We'll take care of you when it's necessary. In the meantime, you can live comfortably on your Social Security." My Social Security. My voice came out louder than I intended. "Do you know how much I get? $400 a month. That barely covers the electricity and the phone." Antoine sighed as if I were a spoiled child. "Well, then you'll have to adjust. We have expenses too, Loretta. The new house, Shanice's car, the vacation we had planned." "The vacation?" I looked at them, incredulous. They spent my savings on a vacation? "We needed a break," Shanice replied without a hint of guilt. "Antoine has been very stressed with work." I rose slowly, feeling my legs tremble. "I want my money back. All of it." The two looked at each other and then started laughing. At first, it was a nervous laugh, but then it turned into genuine guffaws, as if I had said something absurdly funny. "Give it back?" Antoine wiped tears from his eyes. "Loretta, that money is already spent. The new house, the renovations, Shanice's car, our trip to Europe last month, it's all invested." "Besides, Mom," Shanice added, still smiling, "the family needed that money more than you. We have lives to live, plans to fulfill. Well, you've already lived your life." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at both of them, sitting comfortably on my sofa, dressed in clothes bought with my savings, laughing at my pain. Shanice was right about one thing. I had already lived my life, but not in the way she thought. "You know what, Shanice?" My voice was calm, calmer than I felt. "You're right. I've lived my life. I worked 40 years for those savings. I took care of your father during his illness, spending my own resources. I paid for your college, your wedding. I helped with the down payment on your first house." Shanice stopped smiling. Something in my tone had alerted her. "And you're right about something else too," I continued. "You too have lives to live, plans to fulfill, dreams to achieve." Antoine leaned forward, frowning. "So I'm going to do you a favor," I said, walking to the door and opening it. "You're going to live those lives, you're going to fulfill those plans, you're going to achieve those dreams, but you're going to do it without me." "What do you mean?" Shanice asked, standing up. "I mean you can live without me, because from this moment forward, that's exactly what you're going to do." I watched them leave through my door, listened to the engine of my pickup truck drive away, and for the first time in 8 months since my husband's death, I sat in my living room, completely alone. But this loneliness was different. It was deeper, colder. It was the loneliness of someone who has been betrayed by the people they loved most in the world. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake in my matrimonial bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering every word they had said. "You've already lived your life," Shanice's voice repeated in my mind. "The family needed that money more than you." Every phrase was like a knife plunging deeper with each memory. At dawn, I made a decision. If they wanted to live without me, they were going to find out what that really meant. My first call was to the bank. "Good morning. I need to immediately cancel all credit cards associated with my account and change all my access codes." The employee explained the procedure, helped me report the fraud, and assured me they would investigate every unauthorized transaction. It was a long process, but at least it had begun. My second call was to my attorney, Harrison Preston, an older man who had handled my family's legal affairs for years. "Loretta, how are you? It's been a while." "Harrison, I need to see you urgently. I have to make some important changes to my will." There was a pause. "Are you all right? Has something happened?" "Let's just say my priorities have changed. Can you fit me in today?" That afternoon, I was in his office signing documents that completely revoked my previous will. Shanice and Antoine had assumed they would automatically inherit everything. They were about to discover how wrong they were. "Are you sure about this, Loretta?" Harrison asked me as he reviewed the papers. "It's a very drastic decision. I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The next step was more complicated. The pickup truck I had gifted them the previous year was still in my name. Legally, it was still mine. A call to the insurance company confirmed that I could report it as unauthorized use if the registered user was using it without my permission. But the hardest blow would come later, the house where Shanice and Antoine lived. 3 years ago, when they had financial problems, I had helped with a significant portion of the down payment, but what they didn't know was that, at Harrison's suggestion, I had insisted that my name appear as a co-owner on the deed. "It's just for precaution," I had told them then, "to protect the family's investment." Now, that precaution became my most powerful weapon. Over the next few days, I dedicated myself to executing my plan in complete silence. I hired a towing service to recover the truck. They found it parked outside an expensive restaurant on Saturday night. Shanice called me, hysterical, 2 hours later. "Mom, the truck was stolen. We were having dinner, and when we came out, it was gone." "How strange," I replied calmly. "Did you report the theft to the police?" "Of course. But the officer said something really weird. They said the vehicle had been recovered by the legal owner. Do you know anything about this?" "Yes, Shanice. I had my truck picked up." There was a long silence. "Your truck? But Mom, you gifted it to us." "No, darling. I lent it to you and now I need it back." "But we need it for work. Antoine has to get to his office." "Well, then I guess you'll have to find another solution, like taking the bus or buying your own vehicle with your own money." I hung up before she could respond. On Monday morning, Harrison and I met to review the house documents. As co-owner, I had legal rights over the property, and because they had used money stolen from my account to make mortgage payments, they had technically committed financial fraud. "Loretta, This is going to be devastating for them, Harrison warned me. Are you sure you want to go this far? I thought about their laughter that afternoon, Shanice's words, the casual way they had dismissed my feelings and my future. Harrison, they made the decision to live without me. Now they're going to find out exactly what that means. That same afternoon, Shanice and Antoine received a legal notice. As co-owner of the house, I was exercising my right to sell my share. They had 30 days to buy out my part, or the house would be put on the market. To buy out my share, they would need exactly $8,000, the same amount they had stolen from my account. The phone started ringing that night, call after call, Shanice crying, Antoine shouting, threats, pleas, promises to return the money that I already knew they didn't have. I let the phone ring. Every sound was music to my ears. I had lived 69 years being the understanding mother, the sacrificing wife, the woman who always put the needs of others before her own. I had raised my daughter to be independent and strong, but somehow I had raised a person who believed she had the right to take what wasn't hers. Now it was my turn to be strong, my turn to put my needs first, my turn to teach them that actions have consequences and that underestimating a 69-year-old woman had been the biggest mistake of their lives. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. It wasn't the sleep of peace, but the sleep of one who had finally found her purpose. And my purpose was to show them that Loretta wasn't dead. She was just getting started. The silent war had begun, but I hadn't anticipated how painful my own daughter's counterattack would be. Over the following weeks, Shanice deployed a campaign of emotional manipulation that would have impressed a military general. First came the tears. She would show up at my door at all hours, crying, pleading, reminding me of moments from her childhood. "Mom, remember when you read me stories before bed? When you comforted me after my nightmares? This is how you're going to repay all the love you gave me?" Then came the emotional threats. "If you do this, Mom, you'll never see your grandchildren again." This one hurt, especially since Shanice didn't have children, but the implicit threat was clear. She never would if I continued with my plan. Then came the smear campaign. She started calling my few close friends, telling them a distorted version of events. According to her account, I had become senile and vengeful, incapable of understanding that they had only borrowed the money for a family emergency. Brenda Hayes, my lifelong neighbor, knocked on my door one Tuesday afternoon. I had known her for 20 years. We had shared coffees, neighborhood gossip, and the pain of losing our husbands. "Loretta, dear, can we talk? Shanice came to see me yesterday, and I'm very worried about you." I invited her in. Brenda sat down with the expression of someone about to deliver bad news. "Honey, your daughter told me that you've been acting strangely since your husband died, that you've been accusing them of stealing money, that you took their car, that you're threatening to sell their house." I felt the betrayal multiply. Now I was not only a victim of my daughter's theft, but also of her campaign to paint me as a confused old woman. "Brenda, do you really think I would invent something like that?" "No, I don't think you'd invent it, but—" She paused uncomfortably. "Sometimes, when we lose our life partner, we can misunderstand things. Grief makes us see enemies where there are none." I showed her the bank statements, the unauthorized transactions, the exact dates and amounts. I watched her expression change as she reviewed the documents. $8,000 in purchases I clearly hadn't made. "My God, Loretta, this is terrible. Shanice actually did this?" "Not only did she do it, Brenda. When I confronted her, she laughed in my face and told me I had already lived my life." Brenda was silent for a long time, processing the information. Finally, she spoke. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to teach them that underestimating a 69-year-old woman was the biggest mistake of their lives." But loneliness remained my most constant companion. The nights were the worst. I would wake up at 3 a.m, in that silent hour where all fears are magnified, and I would wonder if I was doing the right thing. Was I a cruel mother? Was I a vengeful woman? Or was I simply someone who had finally found her dignity? One morning, while reviewing old family photographs, I found something that changed everything. Among the documents my husband kept in his desk was a folder I had never fully examined. It contained insurance policies, investment documents, and something that took my breath away: deeds to 3 properties I didn't know existed. Throughout our years of marriage, my husband had been incredibly discreet about finances. I knew we had savings, that the house was paid for, that there was a small pension, but I never imagined the true extent of our assets. There was a rental condo downtown that had been generating income for years. There was a small commercial lot he had bought as an investment that was now worth a fortune, and there was an investment account that had quietly grown into a considerable sum. I called Harrison immediately. "You knew about all this?" "Loretta, your husband specifically asked me not to tell you anything while he was alive. He wanted you to live without financial worries, but he also wanted to make sure that if anything happened to him, you would have sufficient resources for the rest of your life." "How much money is there in total?" There was a long pause. "Including the properties, investments, and life insurance policies? Approximately $400,000. The world stopped. I wasn't the poor, vulnerable widow Shanice and Antoine had imagined. I was technically a wealthy woman, a woman who had been robbed by her own family, who had been scorned and humiliated, but who had resources they had never dreamed of. "Harrison, I want you to do something for me. I want you to start the process to sell my share of Shanice's house immediately, and I want you to investigate if there is any legal way to recover the money they stole from my account." "Loretta, with these resources, you could just forget about the stolen money. You could—" I interrupted him. "It's not about the money, Harrison. It's about the principle. It's about my own daughter looking me in the eyes and telling me I've already lived my life. It's about them believing they can treat me like trash because I'm old and alone." "What exactly do you want to do?" I looked out the window at the street where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised my daughter, where I had buried my husband, where I had planned to spend my last years in peace. I want them to learn that Loretta isn't finished living. She's just getting started. That night, for the first time since the theft, I felt powerful. I wasn't the defenseless victim they had imagined. I was a woman with resources, with options, with the ability to change the rules of the game. And the rules were about to change drastically. With my new financial reality, I developed a plan more sophisticated than I had initially imagined. It wasn't just about recovering my money or teaching them a lesson. It was about a complete restructuring of my life, and they were going to witness my transformation. The first thing I did was move. I found a beautiful loft in the city center, near the stylish shops, the restaurants I had admired from afar for years, and curiously, only 3 blocks from the office building where Shanice and Antoine worked. The apartment was everything my previous house was not. Modern, bright, with enormous windows overlooking the city. I hired decorators, bought new furniture, and art for the walls. For the first time in decades, I spent money on myself without feeling guilty. I also hired a cleaning service, a personal chef for 3 days a week, and joined an exclusive fitness studio. At 69, I decided it was time to treat myself like the valuable woman I had always been, but had never allowed myself to be. Meanwhile, the effects of my legal actions began to manifest in Shanice and Antoine's lives. Without the truck, Antoine had to take public transport to work, adding 2 hours daily to his routine. Without access to my money to make house payments, they began to fall behind on the mortgage. But the most effective thing was something I hadn't anticipated: the deterioration of their marriage. Brenda, who had become my involuntary informant due to her friendship with other neighbors in their old neighborhood, told me the details during our weekly coffees. "Loretta, I hear terrible shouting all the time. Last night, the next-door neighbor told me Antoine yelled at Shanice that everything was her fault for stealing the money, so obviously that they should have been smarter." "And what did Shanice say?" "She yelled back that he was the one who suggested using your card in the first place, that he had said you would never notice because you were an old lady who doesn't check her accounts." Every detail was a confirmation that I had made the right decision. They hadn't stolen my money in a moment of desperation. They had done it with calculated cruelty, assuming I was too naive or too old to notice. A month after I moved, something happened that I hadn't planned, but that turned out perfectly. I was having lunch at a fancy restaurant near my new apartment when I saw Shanice walk in. She obviously hadn't seen me. She was looking for a table, clearly nervous and uncomfortable in such an expensive place. I waited until she was seated and then approached her table. "Hello, Shanice." She started so badly that she spilled water on the table. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Having lunch. And you?" I have a work meeting." Her eyes scanned my appearance. The wine-colored dress I had bought the previous week. The jewelry I had never allowed myself to wear. The professional haircut I had gotten at the city's most exclusive salon. "You look different," she said in a small voice. "I feel different. May I sit down for a moment?" She nodded, clearly confused. I sat across from her and could see up close how the last few weeks had affected her. She had dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired and stressed. Her clothes, though still expensive, showed signs of neglect. "Shanice, how are things?" "Mom, you know exactly how things are. You're destroying us." "I'm destroying you?" Interesting perspective. "Mom, please. I know you're angry, and you have the right to be, but this has gone too far. Antoine lost his job." This was new information. "He lost his job? Why?" "Because without the car, he was constantly late. And why? Because the stress had him so worked up that he got into a fight with his boss." She stopped, took a deep breath. "Mom, we're losing everything. Everything. Just as I lost everything when you stole my savings." "It wasn't stealing. We're family, Mom. What's yours should be ours too." I looked at her in silence. Even after everything, she still didn't understand the magnitude of what she had done. "Shanice, do you really believe that? Do you believe that because we're family, you have the right to take what isn't yours without asking me?" "Mom, we were going to take care of you when it was necessary. We were going to—" "When it was necessary? Like now? Where are you now when I need to know my family respects me? Where are you now when I need to know that I'm not just a walking bank account to you?" Shanice started crying, genuine tears, not the calculated ones she had used in previous weeks. "Mom, we didn't know you would take it like this. We thought you would understand." "Understand? Understand that my own daughter sees me as someone who no longer deserves respect because I'm old? Understand that you believe my only function is to give you money until I die? It's not like that, Mom. No, Shanice. You literally told me I had already lived my life. You told me I could grow old by myself. You told me you had lives to live without me." Silence stretched between us. I could see in her eyes the exact moment she remembered her own words, the moment she realized how cruel they had sounded. "Mom, we were stressed. We didn't mean—" "Shanice, the words we say when we're stressed are the ones we truly think. Stress doesn't create cruelty. It just reveals it." I stood up from the table. "Enjoy your lunch, daughter. I have a spa appointment this afternoon. Apparently, I still have life to live." I left her there, crying quietly in a restaurant she probably couldn't afford. As I walked toward the exit, I felt stronger than ever. It wasn't cruelty I felt. It was clarity. The following months were a revelation about who Loretta truly was when no one expected anything from her except to exist quietly. I signed up for painting classes, something I had always wanted to do but had postponed for decades. I started traveling, small weekend trips to nearby cities, rediscovering the feeling of waking up in new places. But the most significant change was internal. For the first time in my adult life, my decisions didn't revolve around the needs of others. I didn't wake up thinking about what to cook for someone else, what to clean, what family problem to solve. I woke up thinking about what would make me happy that day. Meanwhile, Shanice and Antoine's world continued to fall apart in ways I hadn't even anticipated. The financial pressure had exposed cracks in their marriage that had apparently existed for years. Brenda arrived at my apartment one Friday afternoon with fresh neighborhood news. Loretta, there was a terrible scene at your daughter's house yesterday. The neighbors called the police because the shouting was heard out in the street. What happened? Apparently, Antoine discovered that Shanice had been hiding credit card debts, thousands of dollars she had spent on clothes and beauty treatments over the past few years, money he thought they were saving. The irony was not lost on me. Shanice had judged my expenses as unnecessary, but she had been accumulating secret debts on entirely superficial things. "And there's more," Brenda continued. "Antoine yelled that everything had been her fault for ruining the relationship with you, that now they had not only lost the stolen money, but also any chance of reconciliation. Apparently, they were counting on you eventually forgiving them and giving them back access to your money. Antoine yelled that now they were left without the goose that laid the golden eggs." Those words hit me like a slap. After all this time, after everything that had happened, they still saw me as a financial resource, not a person. They hadn't learned a thing. 2 weeks later, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Antoine. "Loretta, I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I need to ask you something." His voice sounded different, smaller, defeated. "I'm listening." "Shanice doesn't know I'm calling you. She's not doing well, Loretta. Very unwell. Since I lost my job, since we started having problems with the house, she's been... I don't know how to explain it. She's like gone, as if she's lost touch with reality." I felt a pang of maternal worry that I tried to ignore. "What exactly do you mean?" "She spends whole days without getting out of bed. She doesn't eat. She doesn't shower. She just cries and repeats that she ruined everything, that she lost her mother over money we don't even have anymore." Despite everything, Shanice was still my daughter. The image of her, depressed, destroyed, caused me pain. But I also knew this was the crucial moment. If I gave in now, if I ran back to save her, she would never learn the real lesson. "Antoine, you're asking me to come back and fix everything as if nothing happened." "No, not exactly. I know that's impossible, but you could at least talk to her. You could at least tell her you don't hate her forever." "And you, Antoine, have you learned anything from all this?" There was a long silence. "I've learned that we are terrible people. I've learned that we treated the only person who truly loved us unconditionally like trash. I've learned that the money we stole wasn't worth a fraction of what we lost." It was the first time I had heard genuine remorse in his voice. "And what else have you learned?" "I've learned that you weren't the defenseless old lady we thought you were, that underestimating you was the biggest mistake of our lives. And I've learned that some things, once broken, can't be repaired simply by saying sorry." His words carried weight. They sounded authentic. But I also knew that desperate people say what they think others want to hear. "Antoine, do you really think Shanice has learned those lessons? Or is she just sad because the consequences turned out to be more severe than she expected?" "Honestly, Loretta, I don't know. But I know she's self-destructing. And no matter how much she hates me for everything we did, I can't stand to see her like this." I hung up the phone without giving an answer. For days, Antoine's words echoed in my mind. Was I a cruel mother for letting my daughter suffer? Or was I a smart woman who knew that true change only comes through true suffering? A week later, I made a decision. I wasn't going to run to save Shanice, but I also wasn't going to completely ignore her situation anymore. Instead, I was going to do something I had never done in my entire life. I was going to act completely on my own terms. I called Harrison. "I want you to draft a letter, a very specific letter addressed to Shanice, and I want you to deliver it in person." "What should the letter say?" "It should say exactly what she needs to hear, no more, no less." That night, I wrote the most difficult letter of my life. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't compassionate either. It was honest, brutally honest. It was going to change everything between us forever. The letter I wrote that night was the culmination of months of pain, reflection, and personal growth. Every word was carefully chosen, every phrase weighed with the precision of someone who had finally found her voice after decades of silence. "Dear Shanice," it began, "this letter is not an invitation to reconciliation or a declaration of war. It is simply the truth from a mother who loves her daughter but is no longer willing to be hurt by her." I continued writing for hours until the first light of dawn filtered through the windows of my loft. I told her about the pain of discovering not just the theft, but the casual attitude with which they had taken my savings. I explained how her words about me having already lived my life had been more devastating than the lost money. But I also wrote about something deeper, how this experience had forced me to examine my own complicity in creating the toxic dynamic between us. Had I been so generous that I had taught my daughter to take without giving? Had I been so selfless that I had never shown her how to respect boundaries? The hardest part to write was the ending. If you have truly learned anything from these months, if you have truly understood the damage you caused, then prove it. Not with words, not with tears, but with actions. Prove that you can be the woman I raised, not the person you became. Harrison delivered the letter on a Tuesday afternoon. He told me that Shanice read it in his presence, that she cried silently, and that the only thing she said was, "Tell my mother I received her message." For 2 weeks, I heard nothing from her. No calls, no unexpected visits, no messages through third parties. It was as if she had completely disappeared from my life. Then, one Friday morning, my apartment doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I found a woman I took several seconds to recognize as my daughter. Shanice had lost weight, a lot of weight. Her hair, once always perfectly styled, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup and was dressed in simple clothes I didn't recognize, but the most striking thing was her expression. There was a quietness in her eyes I had never seen before. "Hello, Mom. May I come in?" I let her in without saying a word. She sat on my living room sofa, looking around the apartment I had created for myself, taking in every detail of my new life. "You look good, Mom. You look free." "Why are you here, Shanice?" "I came to tell you that you're right, about everything." Her voice was different, softer, without the defensive arrogance that had characterized our previous conversations. "I came to tell you I made a decision." "What decision?" "I left Antoine." This was not the news I expected. Why? Because I realized he never felt genuinely guilty about what we did to you. He felt bad about the consequences, but not the act itself. Every conversation we had ended with him blaming you for being too dramatic or blaming me for ruining our comfortable financial situation. She stopped, took a deep breath. But the truth is, it took me a long time to truly understand it too. For weeks I was angry at you, feeling like a victim of your revenge. It wasn't until I read your letter that I finally understood what I had really done. And what was it that you really did? I betrayed you in the cruelest way possible. I didn't just steal money, Mom. I stole your dignity. I stole your right to grow old with financial security. I stole your right to trust your own family. Her voice cracked slightly. And worse than all that, I stole your right to feel unconditionally loved by your own daughter. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, but they were not the manipulative tears of previous months. These were tears of genuine understanding. Mom, I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I came to tell you that I finally understand why you did what you did, and I came to tell you that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the kind of person who deserves to have a mother like you. What exactly does that mean? It means I got a job, a real job that pays little but is honest. It means I moved into a small apartment I can afford with my own salary. It means I'm going to therapy to understand how I became someone capable of hurting the person who loves me the most. I remained silent, processing her words. Part of me wanted to run to her, hug her, tell her everything was forgiven, but a wiser part knew this was the most crucial moment of our entire relationship. And what do you want from me, Shanice? Nothing, Mom, absolutely nothing. I just wanted you to know that I finally woke up, that I finally understood the damage I caused, and that if someday in the future you decide you want me to be a part of your life again, I'll be ready to be the daughter I always should have been." She got up to leave, but before reaching the door, she stopped. "Mom, one last thing. The money we stole. I know I can never give it all back, but I've talked to a lawyer about setting up a payment plan. I want to pay you back every cent, even if it takes me the rest of my life." Shanice turned back to me. "The money no longer matters. What matters is that you finally understood that it wasn't about the money, it was about respect." She nodded without saying more and left. That night, I stayed awake for hours. Not because I was distressed, but because I was processing something I hadn't expected to feel. Hope. Not hope that everything would go back to how it was, but hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new and better on the ruins of what we had lost. The months that followed Shanice's visit were of a strange but welcome tranquility. There were no desperate calls, no dramatic appearances at my door. There were no attempts at emotional manipulation. It was as if we had finally found a balance, albeit a fragile one. Shanice kept her word in ways I didn't expect. Every month I received an envelope with a small check accompanied by a brief note. "For Mom's debt, Shanice." The checks were for modest amounts, $50 or $100, but they arrived religiously on the first Friday of every month. They weren't enough to make a significant difference to my financial situation, but they represented something much more valuable: consistency and commitment. During this time, I also discovered something about myself that surprised me. Without the constant family drama, without the need to always be on guard or planning my next strategic move, I began to experience a peace I hadn't known in decades. I became a volunteer at a senior advocacy center for older women who had suffered financial abuse from their families. I discovered that my story was not unique. There were dozens of women who had been victims of children, grandchildren, or relatives who had abused their trust and resources. Sharing my experience with these women gave me a new perspective on what I had lived through. I wasn't just a betrayed mother. I was a survivor who had managed to reclaim her power in a situation where many simply resigned themselves to being victims. Brenda became my closest confidant during this period. Our weekly coffees were a mix of neighborhood gossip and deep reflections on life, aging, and complicated family relationships. "Loretta, do you ever regret being so hard on Shanice?" she asked me one day as we had coffee on my apartment terrace. "Never," I replied without hesitation. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but it was also the most necessary. If I had given in immediately, if I had run to save her when she began to suffer the consequences, she would never have learned the real lesson. But now that she has changed, now that she is trying to repair the damage, I am proud of her for the first time in years. Not because she is trying to repair the damage, but because she finally understood that there was damage to repair." One autumn day, almost 1 year after everything began, I received an unexpected call. It was Mr. Roberto, an attorney I didn't know. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm calling you on behalf of Antoine Carter, your daughter's ex-husband. He wants to establish an agreement to pay you back the money he stole." "Antoine wants to pay back the money?" "Yes, ma'am. Apparently, he has been working 2 jobs for the last few months and has managed to save a considerable amount. He wants to liquidate his share of the debt completely." This surprised me. I had assumed Antoine had simply disappeared from our lives after the divorce. Why now? "He says he wants to close this chapter of his life correctly, that he wants to be able to look at himself in the mirror without shame." I agreed to meet with Mr. Roberto to discuss the details. A week later, Antoine deposited $6,000 into my bank account, approximately 1/3 of what they had stolen. It wasn't everything, but it was a significant gesture. With the money came a personal letter from Antoine. "Loretta, I know this doesn't erase what I did, but I want you to know that working to pay you back this money has taught me more about the value of honest work than I learned in my entire previous life. Thank you for teaching me, even in the hardest possible way, that actions have consequences. Antoine. That night, I called Shanice for the first time in months. Mom? Her voice sounded surprised, but not distressed. Shanice, Antoine returned his part of the money. There was a long silence. Yes, I know. He told me before he did it. He wanted to make sure I knew he was taking responsibility for his own actions. And how do you feel about it? I feel relieved. I feel like we're both finally growing up, becoming real adults instead of selfish children. Shanice, would you like to have lunch with me next Sunday? Another silence, but this time I could hear the emotion in her breathing. Seriously? Seriously, but on one condition. What is it? No talk about the past, no repeated apologies, no promises about the future. I just want to get to know the person you've become now. It's a deal. That Sunday, for the first time in more than 1 year, I shared a meal with my daughter. She wasn't the same Shanice I had known all my life, but she wasn't the cruel person who had robbed and humiliated me either. She was someone new, someone who was learning to exist in the world with integrity and humility. We didn't talk about forgiveness because we both understood that real forgiveness is not declared in a conversation. It is built through consistent actions over time. We didn't talk about reconciliation because we both knew that what we had before was broken forever, and we would have to build something completely new if we were to have any kind of relationship in the future. Instead, we talked about her plans to go back to school, about my volunteer work, about the books we were reading, about the life each of us was building, independently of the other. At the end of lunch, when we said goodbye, there were no dramatic hugs or emotional declarations, just a soft handshake and a mutual "see you soon" that contained more genuine hope than all the promises and pleas of the previous months. 5 years after my world was shaken by the betrayal of my own family, I found myself sitting on my apartment terrace on a golden spring afternoon, reflecting on the extraordinary journey my transformation had been. I was no longer the same Loretta who had woken up that birthday morning expecting a family celebration and finding the worst betrayal imaginable instead. That Loretta had been a woman who defined her worth by what she could give to others, who measured her success as a mother by how happy she made her children, even at the cost of her own dignity. The Loretta who exists now is different. She is neither cruel nor bitter, but she has learned that love without boundaries is not true love. It is complicity in mutual destruction. She has learned that teaching consequences is not a lack of love, but the deepest expression of real love. Shanice and I had developed a routine of having lunch together once a month. These meals had become precious to both of us, not because we pretended the past hadn't existed, but because they had created a new space where we could get to know each other as the people we had become. During our most recent lunch, Shanice had told me about a promotion at her job, about the night courses she was taking to improve her professional skills, about the small life she had built through her own effort. There was a dignity in her voice I had never heard before, a satisfaction that came from genuine achievement rather than unearned benefits. "Mom, can I ask you something?" she said toward the end of that meal. "Of course." "Did you ever imagine things would end up like this when you decided to teach us that lesson?" I had thought about her question for days before answering. "Shanice, when I started making those decisions, I wasn't thinking about how things would end. I was thinking about how they had to start. They had to start with respect. They had to start with real consequences. They had to start with the truth." And what was the truth? That I was a valuable person who deserved to be treated with dignity, even by my own family, especially by my own family. The support center where I volunteered had become a central part of my new identity. I had helped dozens of women navigate situations similar to mine, and I had learned that my story, however painful, had the power to inspire others to find their own strength. One of the women I had helped, Miriam, had told me something I carried with me every day. "Loretta, You didn't just save yourself, you taught all of us that it's possible to reclaim our power, no matter how old we are or how long we've allowed others to abuse us. I decided to write a book about my experience. It wasn't a story of revenge, although some elements might seem vengeful. It was a story about recovery, recovering dignity, recovering self-respect, recovering the right to live life on one's own terms. The title I chose was simple: It's Never Too Late to Start Living. In the pages of that book, I explained how I had learned that true love sometimes requires allowing the people we love to face the full consequences of their actions, how I had discovered that constantly rescuing others from their own irresponsibility is not kindness but a form of mutual emotional disability. But I also wrote about forgiveness, not as a single event, but as an ongoing process. I had forgiven Shanice, but that forgiveness had come naturally through observing her genuine change over time. It hadn't been a forgiveness dramatically declared in a moment of emotional reconciliation. It had been a forgiveness earned through consistency, respect, and mutual growth. Antoine had continued sending monthly payments and, surprisingly, had ended up returning almost all the money he had taken. More importantly, he had sent a final letter where he wrote, "Loretta, working to pay you back this money changed me more than anything I've done in my life. It taught me that easy money always costs more than it's worth. Thank you for not allowing me to escape without consequences. I became a better man for having to face what I had done." Shanice had managed to return about half of her share of the debt. The payments kept coming monthly, small and consistent. But more valuable than the money was what those payments represented. A continuous commitment to repair, a demonstration that she had truly understood the principle behind the lesson. In my new life, I had found a peace I had never experienced before. It wasn't the peace of the absence of problems, but the peace of knowing I had the tools and the inner strength to handle any challenge life presented me. I had learned that age was not a disqualification for personal reinvention. I had learned that it is never too late to set boundaries, to demand respect, to decide to live by one's own values rather than the expectations of others. That afternoon on my terrace, as the sun set over the city I had come to love, I reflected on the question I had asked myself so many times during the darkest moments of this experience. Had I done the right thing? The answer was still the same. I had done what was necessary. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been comfortable. And it certainly hadn't been the path I would have chosen if I had had other options. But it had been authentic, it had been brave, and it had been effective. The Loretta who now exists at 74 is a woman who learned that true love sometimes requires the willingness to temporarily lose someone to have the possibility of finding the best version of that person in the future. As the city lights began to turn on, I smiled, remembering the words I had written on the final page of my book. In the end, it wasn't about teaching them a lesson. It was about learning to value myself enough to demand that others value me too. And that lesson, at 69, was the greatest gift I could have given myself. 5 years have passed since that morning of my 69th birthday that changed the course of my life forever. Today, as I write these final lines in my personal study, surrounded by the paintings I have created and the books I have devoured in these years of rebirth, I can state with absolute certainty that that betrayal was, paradoxically, the most valuable gift life could have given me. My book, It's Never Too Late to Start Living, became an unexpected success. Not because it was an extraordinary story, but precisely because it was an ordinary story that many women were living in silence. I received thousands of letters from women of all ages who had found in my experience the courage to face their own situations of familial, financial, or emotional abuse. One of those letters, which I keep with special fondness, came from an 82-year-old woman who wrote, "Loretta, after reading your book, I finally had the courage to tell my son I couldn't keep paying his gambling debts. I thought I was too old to change my life, but at 82, I finally learned to say no. Thank you for showing me that age is just a number when it comes to reclaiming our dignity." The support center where I started as a volunteer offered me a full-time position as a counselor. At 74, I have a professional career for the first time in my life, helping other women navigate complicated family situations and reclaim their personal power. Every day, I wake up with a clear purpose, and that sense of usefulness and contribution has been more rejuvenating than any beauty treatment. Shanice and I have built a completely new relationship on the foundations of mutual respect and healthy boundaries. Our monthly lunches turned into weekly dinners, and eventually, she became one of my closest friends. Not the friend a mother has in a daughter out of family obligation, but the genuine friend an adult woman chooses to have in another adult woman she respects and admires. Last year, Shanice finished her degree in accounting and opened her own small firm. She asked me to be her first client, not out of family charity, but because she trusted my ability to judge the quality of her professional work. Managing my finances became a professional collaboration that strengthens our personal relationship instead of complicating it. 6 months ago, for the first time since the divorce, Shanice started a new romantic relationship. Victor is a divorced man her age with children of his own who works as an elementary school teacher. What impresses me most about him is not that he treats Shanice well, but that Shanice behaves like a completely different person when she is with him. She is considerate, generous without being enabling, and maintains her emotional and financial independence intact. Mom, I learned that a healthy relationship is not one where two people desperately need each other, she told me during one of our recent dinners, but one where two complete people choose to share their complete lives. Those words filled me with more maternal pride than any academic or professional achievement she had reached in the past. Antoine, surprisingly, became an occasional but positive presence in our lives. After completing the restitution payments, he continued to send me birthday and Christmas cards with personal notes that showed genuine growth. He remarried 2 years ago to a woman who seems to have brought balance and maturity to his life. In his most recent Christmas card, he wrote, "Loretta, I know I can never fully repair the damage I caused, but I want you to know that the lesson you taught me changed not only my relationship with money, but my relationship with honesty in general. I am a better husband, a better employee, and a better person because you forced me to face the consequences of my actions." My health has remained excellent, something I attribute both to regular physical activity and the emotional well-being that comes from living life on my own terms. At 74, I walk 3 miles daily, take yoga classes, and have started to learn Italian because I always wanted to visit Tuscany and I want to do it speaking the local language. Financially, my situation is better than I ever imagined possible. The properties my husband left have significantly increased in value. My investments have grown steadily, and the income from my book and my professional work have given me an economic independence that allows me to be generous without being vulnerable. I have started a small but effective foundation that helps older women who have been victims of familial financial abuse. We not only provide legal and financial support, but also the kind of emotional support I would have needed during my darkest moments. Seeing these women reclaim their power and rebuild their lives constantly reminds me why it was so important to stand firm during my own battle. The apartment I bought as a temporary refuge has become my permanent home. I have filled it with art, books, plants, and memories of trips I have taken alone and thoroughly enjoyed. It is a space that reflects exactly who I am now, an independent woman, intellectually curious, emotionally stable, and socially connected by choice rather than obligation. If I could talk to the Loretta of 5 years ago, the broken woman who found those bank statements on the morning of her birthday, I would tell her this: the pain you are feeling now is the pain of birth. You are giving birth to the woman you always should have been, but never allowed yourself to be. It will be difficult, it will be terrifying, and it will require more courage than you think you have. But on the other side of this pain awaits a life richer, more authentic, and more satisfying than you ever dreamed possible. Today, as the sun sets over my adopted city, and I prepare for a dinner with friends I have met in these years of self-discovery, I can say without reservation that these have been the best years of my life. Not because they have been the easiest, but because they have been the truest. At 74, I finally learned the most important lesson of all. It is never too late to start living, and you are never too old to demand the respect you deserve. And that lesson, dear readers, is priceless.